The problem with ungrateful actresses. Although acting often seems like it's just about the glitz and glamour, in many ways it's a thankless job, with celebrities being as blindly loved as they are hated. In the case of actresses, the latter tends to be more common. It seems as though every single year an invisible memo goes out into the world that crowns a new actress as difficult, resulting in her reputation plummeting, the public turning on her, and her career suffering as a result. We've seen it happen so many times at this point that you could even say there's a pattern, with multiple actresses being hit with the 3 uns: ungrateful, unprofessional, and unlikable. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at some of the actresses who've been labeled this way by the public and the press in recent years. We'll explore how these labels have affected their careers, the double standards at play within the entertainment industry, and why, in most cases, the backlash they received was undeserved. Let's get into it. Janet Hubert, who originated the role of Vivian Banks on the popular 90s sitcom The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, developed a reputation for being difficult following a public feud with the show's male lead, Will Smith, a dispute that eventually led to her part on the show being recast. According to Hubert, she and her co-star got along just fine when the show first began in 1990, but as time passed, tensions started to rise. While filming the 3rd season of the show in 1992, Hubert was not only pregnant, but was also in an abusive relationship, and these understandably stressful factors resulted in her being less chipper on set. But, as any woman knows, regardless of what's happening at home, the rest of the world expects us to grin and bear it. Although Hubert maintains that she acted professionally in spite of these hardships, in interviews Will Smith claimed the opposite. Quote, "She really has a lot of problems that she brought to work with her. After the first season, she never could really digest the fact that she wasn't the star of the show, on many occasions giving me the middle finger and storming off the set. She was a really difficult person." Hubert was still prepared to sign on for the following season of Fresh Prince, but was shocked to find during negotiations that NBC intended to cut her salary and screen time by half, something she alleged was a, quote, "slap on the wrist for being pregnant and in hormonal hell." While early reports claimed that she'd been fired, Hubert has stated that she actually made the decision to leave the production herself, although let's be honest, they'd left her no other choice. After Hubert's departure, Smith continued to talk about their strained relationship to the press, saying in an interview in 1993, quote, "I can say straight up that Janet Hubert wanted the show to be the Aunt Viv of Bel-Air show. She's mad now, but she's been mad all along. She said once, 'I've been in the business for 10 years and this snotty-nosed punk comes along and gets a show. No matter what to her, I'm just the Antichrist.'" In December 1993, Hubert filed a lawsuit against Will Smith and NBC seeking unspecified damages for defamation, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The suit also suggested that besides influencing the production to reduce her salary, Smith had also hurt her marketability by spreading negative rumors about her to the press. Hubert unfortunately wound up losing the lawsuit, and her career came to a standstill as a result. In comparison, Will Smith was thriving, starring in massively successful films like Bad Boys, Independence Day, and Men in Black, which helped make him a 90s superstar. With that sort of pull in Hollywood, Hubert didn't stand a chance, and she struggled to find any work that was more than a one-off bit part. For the Fresh Prince's 30th anniversary in 2020, Hubert and Smith reunited for the first time in decades, finally addressing their quarrel in person. Hubert shed some light on what her life was like following her departure from the show. Quote, "I had this new baby, and no one. Family disowned me, Hollywood disowned me. My family said, 'You've ruined our name.' Words can kill. I lost everything, reputation, everything. I understand you were able to move forward, but you know those words, calling a black woman difficult in Hollywood is the kiss of death. It's hard enough being a dark-skinned black woman in this business." I'm sure someone in the comments will say, now what does that have to do with anything? But it's important to acknowledge that Hollywood has a history of discriminating against and excluding women of color, with rules even being instituted in the past that limited their opportunities in the industry. Although the 1990s saw a notable increase in films and TV shows that featured black actresses, the vast majority did have lighter skin, which put Hubert at a disadvantage as someone who didn't fit into that beauty standard. This, combined with Will Smith's public disapproval, essentially ensured that the rest of Hollywood would refuse to work with her. Now 67 years old, Hubert has finally shaken off her difficult reputation, but she can never get back all of the work she lost because of it. And it's crazy to think about how differently things might have played out if her co-stars, the producers, and the media had had just a bit more sympathy for what was going on in her life at the time. One of the most public examples of an actress being shunned and shamed for her seemingly ungrateful behavior is Katherine Heigl. Beginning her acting career when she was just a teenager, Heigl appeared in a handful of films including 1996's Wish Upon a Star and 1998's Bride of Chucky, before being cast in the 1999 TV series Roswell, with the role garnering her a bit of attention from the press, although many of the comments were directed towards her looks. As the years went on, she starred in a handful of lackluster television films before finally getting her big break in 2005 after being cast in the ABC drama Grey's Anatomy. Although expectations for the series were fairly low, as other medical dramas like Saved, City of Angels, and Strong Medicine had failed to become commercial hits, Grey's Anatomy unexpectedly struck a chord with audiences, catapulting its relatively unknown cast to fame. Heigl garnered critical acclaim for her performance as Izzy Stevens, even being nominated for a Golden Globe in 2006 and 2007, and she was considered one of the show's breakout stars. She followed this up with a lead role in the 2007 raunchy rom-com Knocked Up, which was a surprising critical and commercial success, and was credited for turning Heigl into Hollywood's next it girl, even being compared to the likes of Julia Roberts, Sandra Bullock, and Meg Ryan. Later that year, she also won her first Emmy for her role as Izzy Stevens, beating out two of her fellow Grey's co-stars Sandra Oh and Chandra Wilson for the award. With all these back-to-back achievements, it seemed as though the foundation was being laid for a successful career in Hollywood, but in January 2008, that all changed. In a now infamous interview with Vanity Fair, Heigl was asked about the projects that had helped make her a household name, and when discussing Knocked Up, she called it, quote, a little sexist. It paints the women as shrews, as humorless and uptight, and it paints the men as lovable, goofy, fun-loving guys. It exaggerated the characters, and I had a hard time with it. On some days, I'm playing such a bitch. Why is she being such a killjoy? Why is this how you're portraying women? 98% of the time, it was an amazing experience, but it was hard for me to love the movie. Although I would hardly consider this a harsh critique, Heigl's comments received pushback not only from the public and the press, but also the other people who worked on the project. Writer-director Judd Apatow and co-star Seth Rogen would both talk about Heigl's criticisms in the years that followed, with Rogen saying that he felt betrayed by her, while Apatow expressed that he was shocked that he hadn't received some sort of apology. Both would also poke fun at Heigl's subsequent career choices and her personality. Leslie Mann, who also starred in the film and is married to Apatow, even felt the need to defend her husband. Quote, I kind of don't know what she was talking about. I'm an actress reading scripts and I've seen what's out there and it's slim pickings. Judd writes great female parts. It seemed like all anyone could talk about in relation to Katherine Heigl in early 2008 was how much she hated Knocked Up, to the point that she felt pressured to clarify her original comments in an interview with People magazine. Quote, although I stand behind my opinion, I'm disheartened that it has become the focus of my experience with the movie. The truth is, it was the best filming experience of my career. Every person that was a part of making Knocked Up helped to encourage, support, and inspire me. I never intended for anyone to think otherwise. Because Knocked Up was her most recognizable role at the time, many members of the public felt as though she was biting the hand that fed her, especially since apart from making her an A-list star, the success of the film also gave Heigl significantly more bargaining power, allegedly being paid $6 million for 27 dresses in 2008 compared to the $300,000 she received for Knocked Up. Heigl also fought to renegotiate her salary on Grey's Anatomy, something which was reported on negatively. She was described as having complained about not being paid as much as the show's lead actress, Ellen Pompeo, and the two women were frequently pitted against one another in the press. After it was reported that Heigl was going to be pulling out of the show entirely, ABC themselves confirmed that she would be continuing on as Izzy Stevens with a pay raise, saying, quote, in recognition of her tremendous talent and value to the show, we offered to raise her compensation significantly. This squabble led to public opinion of Heigl souring even further, and because it was over money, many began to call her greedy in addition to difficult, with the latter sentiment gaining even more traction after the 2008 Emmys rolled around. Many had predicted that Heigl would once again be nominated for her role on Grey's Anatomy, but the actress announced that she would actually be abstaining from awards consideration that year, saying, quote, I didn't feel that I was given the material this season to warrant an Emmy nomination, and in an effort to maintain the integrity of the Academy organization, I withdrew my name from contention. I didn't want to potentially take away an opportunity from an actress who was given such material. This wasn't the first time Heigl had expressed dissatisfaction with the writing on Grey's Anatomy, having openly criticized her character's affair storyline in that same 2008 Vanity Fair interview. Quote, "I don't really know Izzy very well right now. She's changed a lot. I'm trying to figure her out and keep her real. It was a ratings ploy. It was absolutely something that shocked people. It wasn't predictable and people didn't see it coming. It's our 4th season. There's not a lot of spontaneity left. And business is business. I understand that. But I want there to be some cooperation between the business end and the creative end, so there's some way of keeping it real." Television is a very tight-knit, collaborative community, and regardless of how she felt about the show's writing, by airing her grievances out in public, she ruffled a lot of feathers. As a result, people involved with the production began to criticize her in turn, with one anonymous source saying, quote, "She can cost you time every day of shooting. Wardrobe issues, not getting out of the trailer, questioning the script." Another anonymous insider said, quote, "The show bent over backwards to accommodate her film schedule, and then she criticizes the show for lack of material. It's an ungrateful slap in the face to the very writers responsible for her Emmy win in the first place." Apart from snubbing the show's writers, we can also assume that she stepped on the toes of the producers and showrunners, who apart from ratings, put a lot of stock into award season, as any wins bring prestige to the entire production. Following this controversy, tensions on set of Grey's Anatomy worsened, with it often being reported that Heigl behaved like a diva. These rumors were eventually interpreted as fact following a 2009 appearance on The Late Show with David Letterman, where Heigl openly criticized the show's working conditions. Because of this, she was once again branded as difficult, and when asked about the backlash, Heigl maintained that her intent was misconstrued. Quote, "I didn't mean that I shouldn't have to work these hours on the job. It wasn't just me working 17 hours a day. The crew was working longer and harder than me, and I thought it was unfair, but it came out like I was a whiny actress." Later that year, Heigl adopted a daughter, and with her movie career still going strong at the time, she requested to be released from her Grey's Anatomy contract 18 months early, making her final appearance as Izzy Stevens during the show's 6th season. Although it was initially reported that this departure was amicable, interviews from showrunner Shonda Rhimes imply the opposite, with Rhimes stating in a 2014 interview about her production empire that she now institutes a no asshole policy on her sets. Quote, "There are no Heigls in this situation. I don't put up with bullshit or nasty people. I don't have time for it." In the aftermath of all of these incidents, Heigl would routinely be referred to by the press as opinionated, forthright, or candid, typically in a negative manner, while less gracious publications would even call her entitled or a control freak. Heigl herself would acknowledge her increasingly poor reputation. Quote, "The press or the media has decided that I'm outspoken, and I guess that's my angle or something, and if I feel passionately about something, I'll be honest about it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The sort of unwritten code is you say nothing. You turn the questions around or you spin it in a good light, and that's how you deal with these sort of things. You don't address it, you don't bring it up, and you don't have an opinion." While she often seemed somewhat resigned to her fate, she occasionally expressed frustration at her circumstances and the mixed messages she was receiving. Quote, "Do they want a fierce woman or milquetoast? Should I be me or should I pretend to be something I think people want? Pretending seems pretty ridiculous to me." Even after leaving Grey's Anatomy, rumors that she was difficult to work with continued to follow her, and so, in a March 2010 cover story for Entertainment Weekly, Heigl attempted a public apology, which went terribly. The interview was criticized for coming across as Heigl refusing to own up to her mistakes, while the image on the cover, which depicted her praying for forgiveness, was called flippant and tactless. While I agree that the photo shoot was ill-conceived, it honestly feels like no matter what she did, people would find something wrong with it. Since appearing in Knocked Up back in 2007, Heigl had found consistent work in the movie space, but as the years had passed, her projects had become less and less successful critically and commercially, and she even received multiple Golden Raspberry Award nominations for Worst Actress. Oh, how the times had changed. While her poor reputation might not have necessarily been to blame for these films' poor performances, it certainly didn't help, and after all of these duds, Hollywood stopped welcoming Katherine Heigl with open arms. As she said herself, quote, "You can be the most awful, difficult, horrible person on the planet, but if you're making the money, they're going to keep hiring you. I know that whatever they felt I had done that was so awful, they would overlook it if I made the money. But then, my films started to make not quite as much money." In more recent years, Heigl has apologized to many of the people she had supposedly wronged, including Shonda Rhimes and Judd Apatow. But what should she actually be apologizing for? While you could argue that some of her statements might have been better suited for a private discussion instead of a talk show, at the end of the day, did she really do anything that terrible? Is honesty a crime? There are a ridiculous amount of male actors in Hollywood who have committed actual crimes that haven't received even half as much vitriol, and they're still working consistently. But I guess when it comes to women, being outspoken is something that needs to be punished, something that Heigl ironically acknowledged long before she was on the receiving end of this double standard, saying in early 2007, quote, "In this town, women who don't just snap and say, 'Okay, yes sir, yes ma'am,' start to get a reputation for being difficult." We've talked about Megan Fox and her public image at length on this channel, so I'm not going to go into too much detail today. But it'd be impossible to not mention her when it comes to actresses who've been labeled as ungrateful. Prior to being cast in the 2007 film Transformers, Fox didn't necessarily have the most impressive resume, mainly being typecast as the beautiful mean girl in teen comedies. As a result, Transformers is considered to be her breakthrough role, but being part of a massive franchise was hardly all it was cracked up to be. Besides her role as Michaela Barnes being incredibly sexualized and the male-dominant fandom being generally unhinged, she routinely found herself butting heads with director Michael Bay during filming, a fact which only became public knowledge later on. When asked about the director in a 2009 interview for Wonderland magazine, Fox said, quote, "He's like Napoleon, and he wants to create this insane, infamous madman reputation. He wants to be like Hitler on his sets, and he is. So he's a nightmare to work for, but when you get him away from set and he's not in director mode, I kind of really enjoy his personality because he's so awkward. So hopelessly awkward. He has no social skills at all, and it's endearing to watch him. He's vulnerable and fragile in real life, and then on set, he's a tyrant." 3 anonymous crew members from Transformers later released a letter defending Bay after this interview was published. Quote, "Megan has the press fooled. When we read those magazines, we wish we worked with that woman. Megan is the queen of talking trailer trash and posing like a porn star. And yes, we've had the unbearable time of watching her try to act on set. And yes, it's very cringeable. So maybe being a porn star in the future might be a good career option." Fox was known for having an incredibly dry sense of humor and often said things purely for shock value, something which seemed to rub a lot of people the wrong way, with the actress being called rude, obnoxious, and even bitchy by the media. I would personally liken her sense of humor to Aubrey Plaza, but because Plaza's brand was quirky instead of sexy, the public didn't react the same way to her snark as they did to Fox's.
I cry every day. Amy's really intimidating to work with. She's like a monster, like a violent monster. I just take it day by day, and I hope that it doesn't break me down too much. It's a challenge, to work with such horrible people.
As a result, when this letter seemingly confirmed the public's preconceived notions about her, people ran with it, even though it's pretty obvious if you read the entire thing that it was just intended to knock her down a peg by ridiculing her appearance, talent, intelligence, and personality. It's important to understand that in 2009, Megan Fox was everywhere, to the point that several websites attempted to boycott her image because she was so prominent, and I firmly believe that this oversaturation had a lot to do with her downfall. When someone or something is that popular, it's almost inevitable that people will be waiting for a reason to turn on them. We've seen it time and time again. By ridiculing the man who seemingly gave her everything, it was easy for people to call Fox an ungrateful bitch, and therefore someone unworthy of any support or success. Her next 2 films, Jonah Hex and Passion Play, were received poorly, and after being dropped from the 3rd Transformers film because of her difficult behavior, she struggled to find work despite being one of the most recognizable actresses of the era. Although she and Bay eventually reconciled, working together on 2014's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Fox's career never fully recovered, and for the last few years she's primarily starred in direct-to-video releases that have barely seen the light of day. Cara Delevingne's fall from grace in the eyes of the media played out a little differently from the other women on this list, as she was coming from an industry that didn't really put much stock into personality. Delevingne first rose to prominence as a model, frequently appearing on runways and in editorials for high-profile brands like Chanel, Burberry, Fendi, and Victoria's Secret. Colloquially referred to as the girl with the eyebrows, Delevingne eventually became so popular that in 2013, at the age of 21, she was the most Googled fashion figure. While she had once dominated the catwalk, by the time 2015 rolled around, she had become more selective, something attributed to her desire to focus on her blossoming acting career. Delevingne's first acting role had been in 2012's Anna Karenina, but 2015 is when she decided to fully pivot, a choice that was received with a good deal of skepticism and scrutiny. Now, plenty of established models have ventured into the acting world with varying degrees of success, like Monica Bellucci, Shalom Harlow, Tyra Banks, and Gisele Bündchen. But at the time, Delevingne's decision was criticized for being rash, especially since many considered her to still be at the top of her game. Her first major role was in the film adaptation for John Green's YA novel, Paper Towns, but instead of talking about her performance, attention wound up being directed towards her personality. During the film's press tour, Delevingne had a disastrous interview with Good Day Sacramento, with her dry humor and reserved demeanor prompting the host to cut the conversation short and snidely comment that she seemed to be in a mood. While Delevingne was definitely less animated than your average talk show guest, the host didn't make the situation any easier by getting her name wrong, assuming that she was too busy to read the book, and telling her directly to her face that she seemed exhausted and irritated right after she asked them to not be mean. Honestly, I've got to give Cara props for not snapping at them, because that's probably what I would have done at that age. The interview quickly went viral online, with the public and the press referring to Delevingne as awkward, annoying, cringy, and cranky, with former co-host of The View, Nicole Wallace, even saying, quote, "When you're a famous movie star and you get to go on a local news show to promote a movie that people are paying $18 to go watch, you don't get to act like a bitch." Fellow actor Richard Madden also commented on the incident, quote, "It was unprofessional. It made her seem ungrateful. She showed her age. For Cinderella, I did 6 weeks of those interviews, where you get asked the same 8 questions. If you're not capable of doing that gracefully, then don't do it." This led Delevingne to tweet, quote, "I have no idea who you are, but I think it's a little desperate for a grown man to be bad-mouthing someone they don't know. If you really want attention that badly, try focusing on your own work and not other people's." Madden would later apologize and say he was misquoted. I personally find it interesting that the public and the press were quick to pin the blame on Cara, when if you watch the interview, the hosts are outright antagonistic towards her. Meanwhile, actors like Harrison Ford and Hugh Grant are notoriously cranky, but their behavior continues to be indulged because that's just how they are. Delevingne's co-star Nat Wolff would go on to defend her in interviews, calling the controversy overblown and insisting that that was simply her sense of humor. John Green similarly came to her defense in a written statement, quote, "Cara has read the book multiple times, but the question is annoying, not least because her male co-star was almost always asked when he'd read the book, while Cara was almost always asked if she'd read it. The whole process of commodifying personhood to sell movie tickets is inherently dehumanizing. The TV people want some part of you, and in exchange for it, they will put the name of your movie on TV. But in that process, you do lose something of yourself." Cara, however, refuses to stick to the script. She refuses to indulge lazy questions and refuses to turn herself into an automaton to get through long days of junketry. I don't find that behavior entitled or haughty. I find it admirable. Cara Delevingne doesn't exist to feed your narrative or your newsfeed, and that's precisely why she's so interesting. In subsequent interviews that referenced the awkward incident, Delevingne insisted that she was unbothered by the backlash, but this "I don't give a fuck" attitude seemed to rile people up even more. And with her other films like Pan, Suicide Squad, and Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets receiving mixed to negative reception, Delevingne's acting talents were frequently called into question, and it became more and more common to hear people say that she should have stuck to modeling. Because of these acting roles, she also wound up appearing in more interviews, where her sarcastic and candid behavior was once again interpreted negatively, resulting in her developing a reputation for being weird and attention-seeking. While Delevingne's acting career temporarily halted, in more recent years she's found consistent work in the TV sphere, appearing in Carnival Row, Only Murders in the Building, and American Horror Story. But it does seem as though her private life seems to draw the most attention from the press and the public than her actual work. Similar to Janet Hubert, there was a racial component when it came to the backlash directed towards Constance Wu. Gaining widespread acclaim for her role in the television series Fresh Off the Boat, in addition to a lead role in the massively successful 2018 rom-com Crazy Rich Asians, Wu's career seemed to be on the up and up. Her achievements within the industry were often cited as groundbreaking, and she was praised for ushering in a new era of diversity and representation for Asian Americans in Hollywood. But this same community would soon end up denouncing her. In May 2019, it was announced that Fresh Off the Boat was being renewed for its 6th season, something Wu publicly lamented in a series of tweets. In an industry where Asian actors often struggle to find steady work, her comments were seen as a slap in the face to the broader community, and she was quickly accused of being unappreciative of the success and opportunities the show had provided her. She would go on to explain that the renewal of the sitcom meant she would be forced to give up on a different project that she was more passionate about and found more challenging, which some interpreted as a dig at Fresh Off the Boat subject matter, resulting in even more accusations that Wu was being ungrateful. There were even some that alleged that Wu was now acting as though she was too good for TV, despite getting her start there. I think more people need to realize that actors don't owe any of their projects their eternal devotion. It's a job. Following the immense backlash, Wu took a break from social media and decreased her acting workload, and upon her return, revealed that because of the controversy, and specifically several private messages from a fellow Chinese actress who had told her that she had become a blight on the Chinese American community, Wu had attempted suicide. Social media today has become known for its rather unnecessary pile-ons, and Wu was far from the only celebrity whose mental and emotional state had been negatively affected from public scrutiny. She's just been one of the few to actually talk about it. In 2022, Wu also revealed that she had been sexually harassed by one of the producers of the show, which added to her frustration at being forced to return to that hostile work environment. Once again highlighting that just because they're famous and in the public eye, we genuinely have no idea what is actually going on in these celebrities' lives, and our immediate reaction shouldn't be to cast them into the fire the second they make a mistake. While many of the actresses we've discussed have been in the entertainment industry since they were teenagers, none received even half the amount of negative attention that Millie Bobby Brown experienced in her adolescence. Catapulted to stardom after being cast as Eleven in Netflix's popular Stranger Things, like much of the main cast, Brown was quite young at the time of filming. And when the show finally aired in 2016, she was only 12 years old. Although Brown received widespread praise for her riveting performance, she was simultaneously ridiculed and reprimanded for her demeanor during the show's press tour. In these interviews, Brown was criticized for seemingly over-talking, oversharing, and stealing attention away from the rest of her castmates, being called bratty, immature, and vain. This scrutiny, which I would consider unnecessarily harsh in general, is even more cruel in hindsight given her age at the time. Imagine being in middle school and having hundreds of thousands of people watch compilation videos that called you cringy or implied that all of your friends hated you. I personally wouldn't be doing so well. As a main member of the Stranger Things cast, Brown was obligated to continue doing these press tours in spite of the online harassment, and in an attempt to reduce the criticism she was receiving, she changed her behavior, saying in an interview with Glamour in 2023, quote, "In interviews, I couldn't help but think of all the comments, so I just remembered to stay silent and speak when I was spoken to, even though I was dying to join in. I just felt it wasn't my turn." More recently, Brown received criticism for the way she's talked about Stranger Things, with an interview from 2022 being used as evidence that she hates the show. Quote, "Stranger Things takes up a lot of time to film, and it's preventing me from creating stories that I'm passionate about, so I'm ready to say thank you and goodbye." Right on schedule came the "she's so unappreciative" comments, completely disregarding that in a separate interview she said, quote, "I feel like there's a lot of the story that's been told now. It's been in our lives for a very long time. But I'm very ready to say goodbye to this chapter of my life and open new ones. I'm able to create stories myself that are important to me and focus on the bigger picture, but I am really grateful." Keep in mind that she's been involved with Stranger Things for 7 years now. Any normal person would be more than ready to move on to something new. So why is she being punished for wanting to grow professionally? I think people are particularly harsh towards her for a handful of reasons. The first is that she's incredibly young, but also incredibly wealthy, which inherently turns some people off to her. And I get it. Having to be confronted with the fact that a 19-year-old made more money in a single year than you might make in your entire lifetime is a tough pill to swallow. But were people complaining when Daniel Radcliffe made $50 million on a single Harry Potter movie? The second reason that I think Brown gets so much negative attention is because of how direct she is. This level of candor, not only from a young person, but a girl at that, has been ingrained in our society as behavior that is disrespectful and difficult, even though if it were an older man acting that way, it'd be totally fine. The final reason that I think Millie Bobby Brown receives so much flack is because the projects she has been involved with, like Enola Holmes or Godzilla, aren't as prestigious as people were expecting, which makes her desire to distance herself from Stranger Things, a critically and commercially successful series, come across as a strange career decision. But again, she's only 19. There's plenty of time for her to get an Oscar. Jenna Ortega has similarly made waves in the entertainment industry despite her young age. Getting her start on the Disney Channel series Stuck in the Middle when she was only 14 years old, Ortega slowly transitioned into more adult roles, beginning with an appearance on the second season of the Netflix series You. Her performance on the show was cited as a standout, but it wasn't until 2022 that she became a certifiable star. That year alone, Ortega starred in 4 horror films including Scream, X, Studio 666, and American Carnage, all of which helped to establish her as a 21st century scream queen. That year, she was also cast as Wednesday Addams in the comedy horror series Wednesday. Although she initially rejected the role as she was afraid that starring in another TV show might negatively affect her blossoming career, it ironically ended up becoming her biggest success to date. But the process was hardly all sunshine and roses. In an interview about the show's difficult creative process, Ortega said, quote, "I don't think I've ever had to put my foot down more on a set in a way that I had to on Wednesday. Everything that Wednesday does, everything I had to play, did not make sense for her character at all. Her being in a love triangle, it made no sense. There were times on that set where I even became almost unprofessional in a sense, where I just started changing lines. The script supervisor thought I was going with something, and then I had to sit down with the writers, and I'd have to go and explain why I couldn't go do certain things." Ortega would also go on to say, quote, "I can't watch my work, but I can go home from set and say, the scene we shot today felt good. On Wednesday, there was not a single scene in that show that I went home and was like, okay, that should be fine. Now a lot of people know me from that. It's not my proudest moment internally, which I think also adds an extra level of insecurity and stress, because it's like I'm finally getting these offers to these places that I want, but I don't want to be known specifically for that." While I personally think her proactive involvement is a good thing, as an actor being passionate about a role is far better than one who's phoning it in, Ortega received significant backlash for her criticism of the series' writing and direction, with some even saying that she was overstepping as someone who was new to the industry. Stephen DeKnight, a writer for various TV shows including Daredevil and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, had plenty to say about Ortega's supposed unprofessionalism, saying in a series of tweets, quote, "She's young, so maybe she doesn't know any better, but she should. She should also ask herself how she would feel if the showrunners gave an interview and talked about how difficult she was and refused to perform the material." This kind of statement is beyond entitled and toxic. I love her work, but life's too short to deal with people like that in this business. A man pushing 60 lecturing a 20-year-old for successfully doing her job is just ridiculous. I find it interesting that Ortega was criticized for changing her character based on her perception of her, but when men use method acting as an excuse for shitty on-set behavior, it's praised as a sacrifice for their craft. In situations where a man might be considered assertive or a go-getter, women are often misconstrued as defiant, ungrateful, or unprofessional. The backlash towards Jenna Ortega, Katherine Heigl, and countless other actresses who expressed dissatisfaction in aspects of their work highlights the challenges that all women face in the workforce, being expected to be compliant in order to not hurt others' feelings. The latest actress to develop a reputation for being ungrateful is Rachel Zegler, with the level of disdain being directed towards her in recent months being outright bewildering for someone who's only been in 3 films so far. The Rachel Zegler hate brigade can be traced all the way back to 2021, when she was first announced to be playing Snow White in Disney's live-action remake of their 1937 animated classic. Similar to Halle Bailey, who starred in The Little Mermaid, Zegler's colorblind casting received considerable backlash, with people criticizing the decision to cast a Latina actress for a white princess. The casting decision made Zegler the target of the anti-woke crowd, who proceeded to spend all their time digging for any dirt they could use against her. With the Snow White film being in production hell, initially there was very little to criticize apart from Zegler herself, but this past summer they finally found something that stuck, with comments that Zegler had made at the D23 Expo resurfacing and going viral. In one interview with Extra TV, she said of the upcoming film, quote, "The original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There's a big focus on her love story, with a guy who literally stalks her. Weird. So we didn't do that this time." People could not get enough of this soundbite, proclaiming that Zegler didn't deserve the role because she didn't understand the movie. This backlash only worsened after another interview went viral, with Zegler stating this time around, quote, "The reality is that the cartoon was made 85 years ago, and therefore it's extremely dated when it comes to the idea of women being in roles of power and what a woman is fit for in the world. So when it came to reimagining the actual role of Snow White, it became about the fairest of them all, meaning who's the most just and who can become a fantastic leader." Now, I'm not arguing for that interpretation of the story, especially since it's a huge simplification of the 1937 film and a disservice to its impact on audiences, but it's important to understand that this rehashing has nothing to do with Rachel Zegler. As someone who's made multiple videos about Disney, specifically the evolution of the company's female characters, hearing that they're headed in this girl boss direction for the live-action Snow White film doesn't come as a surprise at all. The company has been shallowly reinterpreting their past work and co-opting political rhetoric for over a decade now, often using their actresses as a scapegoat for the inevitable backlash directed towards these superficially feminist stories. And in my opinion, it's pretty obvious that the cast of the Snow White live action are just saying what they've been told to say by the mouse. Disregarding my thoughts on these changes to the film, I find it interesting that so many people are suddenly coming to the defense of Snow White when just a decade ago you could find dozens of articles calling her, Cinderella, and Aurora terrible role models. No wonder Disney's so confused. Because of her comments on Snow White, Zegler has been referred to as arrogant, entitled, ignorant, narcissistic, and worse. Some have even said that because she didn't grow up as an avid fan of the original movie, which I'd argue is pretty normal for someone her age, she shouldn't have been cast in the first place. Although I'd like to point out that she has expressed how proud she is to be playing Snow White.
I got really emotional hearing everybody's reactions to it, which was really, really incredible. And so I feel very blessed to be a part of something that seems to be very important to a lot of people, including myself.
Maybe people are just mad that she's a real-life fairy tale princess while they're busy being grumpy old toads. What other reason would they have to delusionally spread the ridiculous lie that she's been fired from the movie? Ever since she rose to fame, almost everything that comes out of Zegler's mouth has been criticized online. When she lamented that she wasn't invited to the Oscars, despite her film being nominated, she was suddenly a whiny bitch. When she picketed during the SAG-AFTRA strike, saying that a billion-dollar company should be paying its employees fairly, she was being an insufferable diva. When she jokingly said that she was excited to be in the Shazam sequel because she needed a job, she was desperate and ungrateful. There are several male actors who've made similar comments, or worse, about characters they've played or films they've starred in. Yet once again, I don't see people constantly harassing them. Instead, they're praised for their honesty and humor. People didn't say that Jacob Elordi shouldn't play Elvis because his only point of reference for the man was from Lilo and Stitch. And they didn't come for his head when he said he didn't like the kissing booth either. Robert Pattinson notoriously hated the Twilight franchise, frequently expressing his annoyance towards the story, its fandom, and his character Edward Cullen. He even admitted never watching the movies in their entirety, only bits and pieces of them at the premiere. But I guess when Rachel Zegler says that as a child she was scared of a decades-old film, it's an unredeemable fault in her character. Zegler's only been in the public eye since 2021, and she's been immensely successful in that short amount of time. So it almost feels like all of the hatred directed towards her is because the public can't seem to bring themselves to root for a young woman who's doing too well. I also think the fact that Zegler always seems to bounce back really pisses people off even more, and I've got to applaud her for her resilience, because I just know that a lot of the people sitting behind their computer screens calling her names wouldn't be able to handle a single day in her shoes. Now, there are obviously other factors that come into play when it comes to an actress's success in Hollywood, but image is a huge part of it. And if the public and the press have branded you as ungrateful, unprofessional, or unlikable, then the odds definitely aren't in your favor. Although it seems like a pretty cushy gig from the outside, acting is a profession just like any other. Even if you love what you do, odds are you've complained about your job at some point. So imagine if something you said was rehashed to your boss and every single coworker you had, turning you into a villain. It probably wouldn't feel great, would it? Just because they're in the public eye and are considered products by the masses, celebrities shouldn't be forbidden from expressing perfectly normal emotions, nor should they be harassed for saying harmless things that you happen to disagree with. As we've seen, there are plenty of actresses whose careers have been negatively affected because people called them difficult, and we shouldn't allow it to continue happening, especially when they didn't do anything wrong. So instead of spreading around an out-of-context interview for the purposes of rage bait, maybe it's time we all learned some empathy. Let's end the sexist standard that women should only be grateful and always be quiet. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!